Hello and welcome to Cleveland Classic Cinema. Tonight's movie is 1948's Killer Diller, directed by Josh Binney. A while back we showed Heidi Ho, a film starring Cab Calloway, and I gave you a brief history of what were called race films. That is, films that were made for specific ethnic groups, be they black, Jewish, Italian, Greek, whatever. The reason these films were made is because A, there were many immigrants from all over the world pouring into the United States, and the movie studios realized there was money to be made from them, whether they spoke English or not. And B, movie theaters were segregated, just like the restaurants, bus stations, train stations, and just about any other thing you can think of. Something I mentioned in that intro was the fact that all of these films, not just the ones for black audiences, but for all of them, they were all loaded with stereotypes. At that time, this wasn't a problem for two reasons. The first being that stereotypes in movies were not only expected, but were, to a certain degree at least, accepted. The reason for that was that the audiences back then possessed a sense of humor about themselves and their ethnicities that has completely disappeared over the last couple of decades. That's unfortunate, in my opinion. I mean, if you can't laugh at yourself, then also, in my opinion, you're taking yourself and the world too damn seriously. The second reason is that, like it or not, stereotypes are rooted in reality. Now, I'm not saying that they're representative of entire races. I mean, I'm Sicilian, but I'm not a gangster. I do play one on screen, however. Now, when I first watched Heidi Ho, I was a little taken aback at the disposal of the plot in the first 20 minutes or so of the movie. I was until I started getting into the movie, at least. The plot was such a silly, cliched, ridiculous afterthought of a story that it was readily apparent to me that it was nothing more than a hook to hang the main body of the movie on, that being a film performance of Cab Calloway and his band. The good thing about that was that Cab and his band were so good and so talented and just such a joy to watch that I was grateful they were preserved on film when they were in their prime so I could experience their performance. I would have given just about anything to see them live at the Cotton Club or a place like that back in the 20s when they were really young and full of the amazing energy that was just hinted at in the film performance. Something else I should point out is that while I would love to show a movie like To Sir with Love or Lilies of the Valley or The Defiant Ones, the fact is we just don't have the budget to afford movies like that. They're not in public domain and the rights to show them are too expensive. So I end up with movies like the one you're about to watch, Killer Diller. This is another movie in the Heidi Ho tradition of having a nothing plot draped over the framework of a series of film stage performances by some of the leading black entertainers of the time. Some of them are pretty obscure these days, but there are one or two viewers my age may recognize. The plot, such as it is, concerns magician Dusty Fletcher making the fiancée of the theater manager disappear while wearing a new pearl necklace she was given. The manager calls in the cops, who are just as bumbling and clumsy as the magician, and they break up the performances by, tripping over each other during the course of the film. The humor in this film is pretty awful. It's as broad as can be, and I sincerely doubt it was much funnier back in 1948. But the performers and the performances are absolutely outstanding. Since the only real thing to be said about this film is via the bios, let's get to them. Butterfly McQueen was born Thelma McQueen on January 7, 1911 in Tampa, Florida. After studying dance in her youth, she joined the Venezuela Negro Youth Group and got her nickname from dancing the Butterfly Ballet in a 1935 production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. She stuck with the nickname because she preferred it to her given name, Thelma. In 1939, she appeared in the role she's probably best remembered for, the flighty, irresponsible Prissy in Gone with the Wind. She actually hated the part, feeling that the character was an uneducated, idiotic young girl with no common sense. Her film career was unfortunately relegated to those kinds of parts after she appeared in Gone with the Wind. She played a giggly, airheaded secretary in tonight's movie. From 1947 to 1951, she was a regular on the radio show Beulah with Hattie McDaniel, and then in the TV version from 1950 to 1952. In 1980, a Greyhound bus guard mistook her for a pickpocket and cracked several of her ribs, throwing her against a bench. She sued the bus company and after much litigation was rewarded $60,000. She used the money to buy a small one-room cottage outside of Augusta, Georgia, and lived there quietly for the rest of her life. On December 22, 1995, she accidentally started a fire in her house, attempting to light a kerosene heater. She was found by firefighters on the sidewalk outside of her house with burns covering 70% of her body. She died of her injuries later that night at the Augusta Regional Medical Center. She was 84 years old. Dusty Fletcher was born Clinton Fletcher on July 7, 1900 in El Dorado, Arkansas. He appeared in 6 films over the course of his movie career, more often than not being billed as Dusty Open-the-Door Richard Fletcher. His one claim to fame is his recording of the novelty tune Open the Door Richard, which was based on his vaudeville routine, wherein he would play a drunk man trying to gain entrance to his house. He would stumble onto the stage weaving and muttering about being locked out, then would carry a ladder out and pretend he was trying to get in an open window. He invariably fell off the ladder and always yelled, "Open the door, Richard!" at the top of his voice while doing so. He was an excellent physical comedian, and the audiences roared with laughter as he did his act. In 1946, bandleader Jack McVeigh turned Fletcher's catchphrase into a song and had a big hit with it. Fletcher later recorded his own version using the same arrangement and scored another hit. Fletcher performed the act with a song added for the rest of his career. He died on March 15, 1954. Nat King Cole was born Nathaniel Adams Coles on March 17, 1919 in Montgomery, Alabama. He started receiving music lessons from his mother at the age of 5, and by the time he was 12, was playing organ at the church his father was a pastor of in Chicago. At the age of 14, he organized a 14-piece orchestra called the Royal Dukes. Although an excellent baseball and football player, his first love was music, and in 1939 he formed the King Cole Trio after his publicist put a silver foil crown on his head and dubbed him King. He and his band later toured Europe and did a command performance before Queen Elizabeth II. In 1948, he married Maria Hawkins Ellington after being introduced to her by Eddie Rochester Anderson, and they had 2 daughters, Natalie and Caroline. He was the first black performer to have his own television show, which he himself canceled due to a lack of sponsorship. David Sarnoff, the head of NBC, decided the show would be sustained by the network rather than by sponsors, and saw to it that it had top-of-the-line production values and guests, many of whom were personal friends of Cole, and appeared either for minimal pay or free. The show had very high ratings and was quite popular, but no national sponsors were forthcoming, being fearful of alienating their viewers in the South. Even though NBC was willing to keep the show on the air, Cole pulled the plug after only 1 season, remarking bitterly, "I guess Madison Avenue is afraid of the dark." He was a heavy smoker, often going through 3 packs a day, feeling that it helped him retain the smoky quality of his voice. He did have an amazing voice. No one has ever equaled it, and not surprisingly, no one has ever tried. Cole appeared as an actor in 23 films and television shows, but gained most of his credits doing soundtrack work for more than 170 movies and TV shows. One of his most famous recordings is his version of Mel Torme's The Christmas Song, one of the few Christmas songs I never tire of hearing. His daughter Natalie, quite a singer in her own right, released an album in 1981 called Unforgettable with Love, in which she sang a duet with her late father on the title song. Nat King Cole died of cancer on February 15, 1965 in Santa Monica, California. He was 45 years old. Jackie Moms Mabley was born Loretta Mary Aiken on March 18, 1894 in Brevard, North Carolina. She began her career at 14, adapting her stage name from her former boyfriend, Jackie Mabley, and joined the all-black troupe of Henry Bowman and Tim Moore, soon becoming a success in the segregated black vaudeville circuit known as the Chitlin Circuit. She always played a down-to-earth grandmotherly type, appearing on stage in an old-fashioned flowered print dress, floppy hats, and carrying a large purse. She was a favorite among the females in the audience, especially when she discussed the psychology of men. Her self-assured manner, quick wit, and sharp tongue helped her sustain a career over 5 decades. At the height of her career, she was earning $10,000 a week appearing at the Apollo Theater. She was first introduced to white audiences in 1960, appearing on the Ed Sullivan, Mike Douglas, Flip Wilson, and Smothers Brothers shows. Many female comedians in the 60s considered her a role model and fashioned their routines after hers. Moms Mabley died on May 23, 1975, in White Plains, New York. I believe the dance troupe, the Four Congaroos, were part of the Harlem Congaroos, the same troupe that appeared in Hell's Poppin'. There's no biographical material to be found for Patterson and Jackson, the 2 singers who appear in the review and do an excellent impression of the Ink Spots singing If I Didn't Care, which viewers who have seen The Shawshank Redemption will be familiar with. They do an excellent act, so I wanted to mention them at least. There's not a lot left to say about this movie. It's interesting as a curio, but that's about it. Of course, it's great to see Nat King Cole and the other entertainers performing, but the surrounding story is lacking, shall we say. Be that as it may, sit back, relax, and enjoy Killer Diller right here on Cleveland Classic Cinema. Stick around after the feature, and I'll be back with a few other things.